We used to go camping in Kearney, Ontario every year. Same group, same place. It became a sort of tradition. Early fall, when the bugs weren't too bad and the nights were still bearable without waking up frozen stiff. The trees would just be starting to change, and the whole forest would glow in this orange and gold haze during the day. I always liked that time of year. Something about how quiet the woods got when the air turned a little colder. Less people, less noise. Our group varied in size depending on who could make it. Sometimes 8 or 9 of us. Other years, just 4 or 5. That year, there were 7 of us. We were all in our 20s at the time. College friends, old roommates, cousins of friends who'd become regulars. We didn't have much in common anymore except for this trip, but it always clicked once we were out there. No responsibilities, no pressure. Just a few days to drink, smoke, hike a little, and sleep under the stars. We always set up camp the same way. We'd pick the flattest area near the lake, clear out the brush, and form a circle with our tents. Fire pit right in the middle, everyone facing inward like our own little base camp. We weren't survivalists or anything. We brought coolers, camping chairs, even portable speakers. It wasn't hardcore, just a rustic getaway. That first night, like usual, we got a fire going just before sunset. The sound of the lake was in the background, lapping gently against the shore, and the sky was starting to shift into that deep blue. Someone broke out the shrooms early. Just a couple of us took them, not a heroic dose or anything, but enough to start that slow shift in perception. Others were smoking joints or sipping on whiskey. I was doing a bit of everything, just easing into the night, enjoying that buzzy glow that comes with being outside and just a little bit altered. It was maybe an hour after dark when the guy showed up. I didn't notice him at first. He just sort of walked into the circle like he belonged there. 1 minute it was just us, and then suddenly there was a new person standing by the fire, hands in his pockets, wearing a dark green jacket and a ball cap. He was clean-shaven, late 30s maybe, average height, a bit muscular, not someone who looked out of place in the woods. He said something about being in the military and taking time off, that he was camping a little further down but hadn't bought firewood. I didn't catch all of it. I was a little too high and distracted by the way the fire was flickering against the trees. But the general message was that he wanted to hang out with us for the night. We let him. Of course we did. We weren't the type to turn someone away, especially not in the middle of the woods when it was already getting cold. He offered to throw in some cash for firewood, and someone said, yeah, sure, why not? He sat down on one of the logs and started chatting. I don't remember what about. I remember the way he sat, though, very still, hands folded in front of him. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, just sat there and laughed when we laughed, nodded when people told stories. He wasn't annoying or anything. If anything, he was almost too polite, like he was trying hard to blend in. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was tripping a little, watching the sparks from the fire float upward and get swallowed by the trees. The night wore on. One by one, people started heading off to their tents. A couple more drinks, a few last smokes, and then it was just the crackle of the fire and some shuffling of sleeping bags. I was maybe the second or third person to call it a night. Crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and lay there listening to the sounds outside. You could hear the fire pop and shift, the faint hum of wind through the leaves, someone letting out a last cough from the other side of camp. I closed my eyes, letting it all blend together. I woke up around 4 in the morning. I wasn't sure why. Maybe the cold. Maybe the shrooms still playing tricks on me. It was dead quiet, except for the faint crackle of fire. I peeked out through the small flap of the tent, just enough to see what was going on. The fire was going again, stronger now, not just a few embers. And he was sitting there, the guy, the random stranger, on the same log, still, staring at the fire, talking to himself. I couldn't make out the words, just a soft mumble. His hands were moving slowly, like he was emphasizing something to someone who wasn't there. He wasn't whispering, not exactly, but it wasn't loud either, like he was narrating something to himself. I watched for a minute, maybe 2, tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I told myself I was still a little high, that I was overthinking. It didn't feel right, but it didn't feel threatening either. Just off. I zipped the flap shut and went back down into my bag, pulled it over my head. I figured if there was a real problem, someone would say something, but no one did. When I woke up again, it was morning. The fire had burned low, barely smoldering. I sat up, stretched, looked around. Everyone was fine. A few people were already up, boiling water for coffee. The guy was gone. First, no one said anything. Then someone asked if anyone had seen where the guy went. One by one, people started remembering pieces of the night. How he'd arrived, what he said, the way he just sat there. We looked over at the site next to us, where he said he was camping. It was spotless. Not just clean, there was no sign anyone had ever stayed there.
No tem, no garbage, no footprints.
The ground looked untouched. Not a broken branch, not a single beer can. Like it had been reset overnight. We stood there for a while, staring. No one moved, just stood silently, trying to figure out if this was some elaborate prank or if we were misremembering things. But we all remembered him. The jacket, the way he sat, the money he offered for firewood, the soft voice. Through talking, we realized something else. He never went to sleep. The last two people in our group had gone to bed just after 3:30. The first person to get up that morning did so around 6:10. In that window, he was gone, vanished without a trace. That whole day felt a little strange. We went about things like normal, swam in the lake, cooked food, laughed, but every now and then, someone would glance over toward the empty site. It was like an itch we couldn't scratch, a riddle we couldn't solve. Eventually, we finished the trip, packed up, drove home. It slipped into the back of our minds, one of those weird camping stories you pull out once in a while. No proof, no pictures, just a shared memory we all had. Then, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I was home alone, flipping through channels late at night. The news was on. I wasn't paying attention at first, just listening while I cleaned up. Then I looked up, and I froze. The face on the screen. I knew it. It wasn't a maybe. It wasn't a he kind of looks like. It was instant. The same guy. The one from the fire. Same face. Same eyes. Same everything. He'd been arrested. Murder. Multiple charges. Assault. Disappearances across a few provinces. They were calling him a transient, someone who moved from park to park. Never stayed in one place too long. Camped alone. Kept to himself. I stared at the TV for what felt like 10 minutes. Just frozen. I couldn't remember his name because I don't think he ever told us his real one. But I remembered the way he sat. The stillness. The way he looked through people instead of at them. There was no way to prove it. No pictures. No video. Just memory. But my brain had saved it like a screenshot. Something deep down had flagged it as important, even if I didn't realize it at the time. I don't tell this story often. When I do, people don't really know how to respond. I don't blame them. I don't even know what to think of it. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was someone who looked exactly like him. But I trust my memory. I trust that feeling I had when I saw his face on the news. We let him into our circle, shared our fire, went to sleep while he sat awake, mumbling to himself, staring into the flames. Any one of us could have been a headline, but we weren't. We just got lucky. Since then, I don't camp the same way. I don't invite strangers into the circle. I don't sleep near the fire, and I never, ever ignore that gut feeling again. Some people talk about ghosts or monsters in the woods, but the real horror isn't that. The real horror is when someone slips into your life quietly, just for a night, and you don't realize until years later that you were inches away from something truly dangerous, and you didn't even know it. I used to post a lot of my camping experiences online, just short trip logs, weird observations, maybe some odd things I'd come across out in the woods. People seemed to enjoy them. Most of it was harmless, just small stuff like hearing animals around camp or seeing strange objects deep in the forest. Over time, I built up a bit of a following. Not big or anything, just enough that regulars would comment. One time, I shared a story about a solo trip up near Temagami, Ontario. I had a rough night there where I kept hearing something moving through the brush around my tent. Turned out it was just a porcupine, but the whole thing had freaked me out. I told it well, people liked it. got a few laughs. Then I started getting comments like, "Great story, OP, but you need to deal with the follow-ups." I thought they meant I should post follow-ups about what happened after the trips. So I started doing that. I posted pictures, GPS pins, updates on wildlife I saw, new gear I tested. But the comments got weirder. People kept asking about what I saw after. They started referencing specific nights I hadn't described in detail, like they knew more than I had shared. It was strange, but I brushed it off. Just internet people trying to be creepy or funny. Until one trip changed that. It was early fall. The leaves had started turning, and the weather was right in that sweet spot. Cool enough for long sleeves, warm enough to sleep comfortably without freezing. I decided to head out for a weekend trip. Nothing too far, just a spot I'd found a year before off an old logging road, down near a slow-moving river. I'd camped there once with a buddy and remembered it being quiet and remote. The trail in wasn't maintained, which meant you had to park off the road and hike through brush for about 45 minutes before hitting the clearing. That day I had my full pack, tent, food, a small hatchet, even a folding chair. I had a 3-day weekend and didn't plan on leaving early. I got to the clearing around late afternoon. Sunlight was filtering through the trees, that golden hour light making the leaves glow. The spot looked just like I remembered it. Flat ground, no garbage, fire ring still half standing from last year. I pitched the tent, collected wood, and cooked dinner before sunset. The first night went fine. No weird noises, no visitors. I slept better than usual, probably from the hike in. But the next morning, I woke up to something strange. There were boot prints outside my tent. I noticed them as I stepped out to stretch. Clear impressions in the soft dirt, not mine, facing the tent and circling around it. They were deep and sharp, recent. You could see the lug pattern clearly, different from my own boots. They came in from the brush, circled my tent twice, and walked off into the woods. No trash, no broken branches, no campfire, just prints. I stood there for a while, just staring at them. They weren't mine. I was alone. I checked my food stash and gear. Everything was still there. Nothing stolen, nothing touched. But it didn't feel right. The rest of the day, I tried to act like normal. I hiked down to the river, filtered some water, took a few pictures, and tried to keep my mind off the boot prints. I kept telling myself someone just passed by and got curious. Maybe a hunter. Maybe someone who saw my tent and just wanted to see if I was around. Still, I carried my hatchet with me the whole day. Never let it leave my hand when I was near camp. That night, I didn't sleep as well. I kept waking up, listening. Nothing obvious, no snapping twigs or footsteps, but the woods felt different, still too quiet. At some point around 3 a.m., I thought I heard something lightly brushing against the back of the tent. Just one soft movement. I held my breath, heart pounding, and waited, but nothing else came. I didn't dare look. In the morning, I stepped out again and scanned the perimeter. No new tracks, no signs of anything disturbed. But when I walked over to where I kept my firewood, I found something small and odd. A spent lighter, black, scuffed, half buried in pine needles. I didn't smoke, and it hadn't been there yesterday. Now I was on edge, really on edge. I packed up most of my gear, left the tent in place, and hiked out a bit, just to clear my head. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe someone had passed through earlier and dropped it. But why not say anything? Why circle my tent? Why leave without a word? I came back around sunset and immediately noticed one more thing. My folding chair had been moved. It was subtle, but I knew exactly how I left it. Now it was a few feet to the left, facing a different direction, half folded. No animal would do that. I didn't build a fire that night. I sat in the tent, listening, hatchet in hand. The woods felt like they were pressing in on me. I kept thinking about those comments I'd gotten on my stories, how people kept asking about follow-ups. It echoed in my head. I started wondering, what if someone had been following me through those stories, not just online? I always gave vague directions, general locations, but maybe someone figured it out. Maybe they were waiting for me. At some point, I dozed off. I don't even remember falling asleep. But just before dawn, I woke up to something. A light, faint, bluish, like the glow of a phone screen just outside the tent. It didn't move. It stayed steady for about 10 seconds, then went dark. I sat there frozen, every nerve in my body wide awake. I didn't unzip the tent, didn't make a sound. I just stayed perfectly still, trying not to breathe too loud. I didn't move until the sun was fully up. When I finally got the courage to open the tent, there was nothing there. No one. No footprints this time. No objects left behind. But I didn't waste time. I tore down the tent in record time, crammed everything into my pack, and hiked out without eating. I kept checking over my shoulder the entire way, certain that I'd see someone through the trees. I never did. I got to the car, threw my stuff in the trunk, and drove for a long time before I even felt normal again. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel and locked the door with the deadbolt and chain. I didn't sleep well. When I got home, I deleted the post I had planned to upload. I stopped updating my camping blog completely. I didn't want to give anyone else clues. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe someone local was wandering by. But it didn't feel like that. I kept thinking about those prints, the chair, the lighter, the light at dawn. Someone was out there, and they didn't say a word. A few months later, I started seeing strange emails in my inbox. No subject, no message, just a single line in the from field that read, "Great story OP," over and over. Same wording, no way to reply. The email addresses were random junk. I blocked them, but more would show up. Sometimes weeks apart, sometimes back to back. I started locking everything. Doors, windows. I changed my routines. Stopped sharing where I was going. I didn't hike alone anymore, and I definitely didn't camp solo. The emails eventually stopped, or at least slowed down, but I still get the chills when I open my inbox and see something I don't recognize. The scariest part wasn't what happened out there. It was what didn't happen. The silence, the watching, the feeling of being followed and never getting answers. Whoever that was, they wanted me to know they were there. They didn't steal, didn't hurt me, but they got close. Close enough to make it clear I wasn't alone. It wasn't a ghost or monster. It was just a person, and that's what makes it worse. I never posted that final trip. This is the first time I've written it down, and I guess this is the real follow-up. So yeah, great story, OP? Maybe, but sometimes you don't want the follow-up. Sometimes it's better not to know who's on the other side of the fire, or the screen, because they might be closer than you think. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, enough that most things don't bother me anymore. Strange animal sounds at night, unexpected shifts in weather, even being out there alone. Those things used to get to me, but over the years I learned to live with them. I got good at being comfortable in places that make most people uneasy. The forest has rules, and as long as you know them and follow them, you usually come out fine. But there's one trip that still sticks with me, one I think about more than I'd like to. It didn't feel off until later, until I had time to think about it. And even now, years later, I still catch myself going back over the details, trying to answer the same question that's always at the center of it. What exactly happened out there? It was mid-October, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. A friend had backed out of a weekend trip last minute, but I decided to go anyway. I had everything packed and the time off work, so I figured, why not? I'd gone solo plenty of times before. I knew the spot well. A stretch of forest near a small lake about 2 hours north of where I lived. It wasn't an official campground, but there was a clearing I'd used before, just far enough off the trail to be hidden but close enough to reach easily. I left early Friday morning. The sky was overcast, and the air had that wet, cold smell that comes just before winter. I parked at the same small pull-off and hiked in with my gear. The leaves were turning fast. Reds, yellows, and rust browns scattered across the ground. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, until the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional gust of wind in the trees. I reached the clearing by mid-afternoon and started setting up camp. There was a flat patch for the tent, a natural ring of rocks for a fire, and enough dry wood nearby to keep it going through the night. After the tent was up, I unpacked a little stove, some food, and settled in. No reception out there, no distractions. Just the forest and me. That first night was uneventful. I cooked some food, kept the fire going until about 10, then crawled into my sleeping bag. I remember how cold the air was when I unzipped the tent in the morning. Everything was damp with dew, and a light fog had settled across the trees. I boiled some water, made coffee, and just sat there listening to the forest wake up. I spent most of Saturday hiking around, taking photos and making notes. I always kept a notebook with me on these trips. Not for anything special, just to jot down little things I noticed or thoughts that came to mind. It helps pass the time when you're out there alone. It wasn't until I got back to camp later that afternoon that I noticed something a little strange. My firewood pile had been moved. Not much, just enough that it caught my attention. A few logs were stacked differently, and one or two pieces that I was sure I hadn't touched were lying to the side. At first, I thought maybe an animal had come through, but there were no tracks. The ground was soft from the dew and the recent rain. It would have shown something, but it was clean. I stood there for a while, looking around, trying to convince myself I was wrong, that I'd just forgotten how I left it. Eventually, I let it go, restacked the wood, and got the fire going again. Still, I kept looking over my shoulder as I cooked that night. Something about it didn't feel right. That night, I didn't sleep as well. The wind picked up, and I kept hearing faint creaks and snaps from the trees. Normal forest sounds, I kept telling myself. But I found myself lying there, wide awake, listening for footsteps. The next morning, I was stiff and tired. I got out of the tent and walked a few feet to the edge of the clearing to stretch and take a leak. When I turned around, I stopped cold. There was something on top of my tent. It was just a small bundle of twigs, tied together with what looked like a strip of cloth. I hadn't put it there, and it hadn't fallen from any trees. The area above the tent was clear. It had been placed. I didn't move for a few seconds, just stared at it, my breath visible in the cold morning air. I walked over slowly and took it down. It wasn't anything fancy, just maybe 6 or 7 sticks wrapped tight with a grayish piece of fabric. Old, frayed, looked like it had been torn from something. There were no markings, nothing to give any clue where it came from, but it had been tied neatly, purposefully. I didn't keep it. I walked to the edge of the clearing and threw it into the woods. I packed up not long after that. The plan had been to stay through Sunday night, but I decided I'd seen enough. Something about the air had changed. The forest felt different, like I wasn't alone anymore. The hike out felt longer than the hike in. Every so often, I'd stop and listen. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind me, watching from the trees. When I got back to my car, everything looked the same. I loaded up, locked the doors, and drove the whole way home with my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. That should have been the end of it. A weird trip with some small strange details, enough to creep me out, but nothing concrete. And for a while, that's how I left it. Life got busy again. Work picked up, and the whole thing faded into the background. Until a few months later, I was going through one of my storage bins in the basement, reorganizing gear, checking for mold, that kind of thing. I pulled out the notebook I'd brought on that trip. I hadn't read it since I got back. Figured it was just random notes, trail names, weather stuff. I flipped through it. The first few pages were normal. But then, about halfway through, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a page I didn't remember writing. The handwriting was mine, no doubt about that. Same pen, same notebook. But I had no memory of writing it. It just said, "Oh, now that's an excellent question." That's it. Written in my own hand, in the middle of a blank page. No context, no lead up, just that single line. I must have stared at it for 5 minutes. The more I looked at it, the less it made sense. I couldn't remember thinking it, much less writing it. But there it was, plain as day, in the notebook I kept in my tent that weekend. I closed the book and put it away. That night, I didn't sleep well. Since then, I've gone over everything again and again. The moved firewood, the twig bundle, the writing I don't remember. None of it is huge on its own, but together it paints a picture I don't like. I started to wonder, was someone out there, watching me? Did they come into my camp while I was asleep? What if they were just a few feet from my tent, crouched in the dark, waiting? And the note, what did that mean? Oh, now that's an excellent question. What question? Was it something I thought while I was writing? Or something someone else said? Why would I write it down like that? I've thought about it more than I should. Sometimes I wonder if I was closer to something dangerous than I realized. That whoever or whatever was out there with me that weekend didn't want to hurt me. Not yet, anyway. Maybe they were just watching, testing the waters, seeing how close they could get without me noticing. The bundle on the tent. That wasn't an accident. That was a message. I haven't gone back to that spot. I haven't even camped alone since then. I stick to public campgrounds now with other people around. It's not the same, but it feels safer. Because the truth is, out in the woods, things can happen that no one will ever know about. There's no cameras, no lights, no cell service. If something or someone wanted to make you disappear, they'd have all the time in the world. And the worst part is, sometimes you don't even know how close you came. So now, whenever someone tells a camping story or asks about strange things in the woods, I usually just smile and say I haven't seen much. But in my head, I'm always thinking about that line in the notebook. Oh, now that's an excellent question. It still echoes in my mind sometimes, usually late at night, when everything's quiet. And every time I think about it, I get the same cold feeling down my back, because I still don't know who or what the question was meant for. But whatever it was, it knew I was there. And I think it wanted me to know it had been there too. I didn't used to read the news much. I always found it depressing: war, disasters, politics, missing people. So I stayed away from it. But one night last year, I was at my brother's place, just flipping through channels while he was getting ready in the other room, and I paused on a story that had a face I thought I recognized. I sat there watching, something about the way the guy looked pulling at something in the back of my brain. That weird itch you get when you know something is familiar, but you can't quite say why. They were talking about a man recently arrested for a string of violent crimes. Not just robbery or fights, real violent stuff. Assaults, murders, some that went back years. There were gaps in the timeline. Police weren't sure how long he had been doing it, just that it went back further than they originally thought. The moment I saw his face, I stopped what I was doing. I sat down on the couch and turned the volume up. It wasn't just that he looked familiar. It was like my brain had filed him away under a category that only lit up when it really mattered. I knew I'd seen him before. I just didn't know where. Not yet. For the next few days, I kept thinking about it. It was the eyes. Something about them stuck with me. I kept thinking about when and where I might have seen him. Then I remembered something from years ago, a camping trip. It had slipped into that part of my mind where you store odd but harmless memories. Until now, I hadn't thought about that trip in a long time. It was about 6 or 7 years ago. Me and 3 other guys I used to work with, co-workers, but we hung out often enough outside of work to call each other friends. We weren't wilderness experts or anything, but we'd done a few weekend camping trips together, mostly at the same provincial park in northern Ontario. The park was big, mostly forest, with lakes and rivers scattered all over. We liked to hike out a bit, get away from the main grounds. There was a spot we always came back to, just far enough off-trail to feel remote, but close enough that if something went wrong, we could get back within an hour or two. We went in late September that year. The weather was cool and dry, which we preferred. Fewer bugs, fewer other people. We arrived early on a Friday, parked at the trailhead, and hiked in with our packs. The site was where we remembered it, and by mid-afternoon, we had our tents up and the fire pit cleared out. I remember the smell of pine in the air and how quiet the forest felt. That part of Ontario gets almost eerily still in the fall, like the trees are holding their breath before winter. We were set up in a loose half-circle around the fire, the way we always did it. No big plans, just a weekend of beer, hiking, and talking about things we didn't normally bring up in day-to-day life. That first evening, we cooked some food over the fire, cracked a few cans open, and sat back watching the flames. Sometime after dark, maybe around 10 or 11, a man walked into our sight. We hadn't heard him approach. No crunching leaves, no footsteps. 1 second it was just us, the next he was standing near the edge of the firelight. He was probably in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. Fit, clean, wearing a plain black jacket and dark pants. He carried a small pack. He gave a small wave, stepped into the light, and said he'd been hiking nearby, saw the fire, and asked if he could warm up for a bit. He didn't have his own fire going and didn't want to sleep cold. We were surprised, but not really alarmed. It wasn't that uncommon to run into other people in the woods, even that far out. Maybe the only strange thing was how quiet he had been walking in. He didn't bring any gear to sit on, so he stood for a while, then found a rock nearby and sat down. Didn't really talk much, just nodded along while we chatted, occasionally adding in a word or two. He didn't drink, didn't seem to eat, said he was ex-military, taking a break and spending a few weeks hiking. His answers were always short and he never gave us a full name, just said he liked to move light. After about an hour, the vibe started to feel a little off. I couldn't place it exactly, just something about the way he watched us, his body language, still and alert, like he was waiting for something. He didn't seem nervous, but he also didn't really relax. Still, we didn't say anything. None of us wanted to be rude, and there was no real reason to ask him to leave. Eventually, around midnight, we started to head to bed. One by one, we turned in. I was the last to zip up my tent. He was still by the fire, poking at the logs with a stick. I fell asleep uneasy, but told myself I was just overthinking it. I woke up once in the night, not sure what time it was, but the fire was still going. I looked out through a small gap in my tent flap and saw him. Same spot, same posture, just sitting, staring into the flames. I couldn't hear anything, but he looked like he might have been talking to himself. His lips moved, slow and steady, and he occasionally looked toward our tents. I remember thinking, this isn't right, but I stayed where I was. No one else stirred. I figured if it were really a problem, I'd hear something. I rolled over and went back to sleep. When I got up the next morning, he was gone. No trace, no footprints, no pack, just an empty patch of dirt near where he'd been sitting. The fire had burned low but was still warm. We asked each other if anyone saw when he left. No one had. No one heard anything. We walked around a bit, checked the trails nearby. Nothing. It was like he had disappeared into the woods without a sound. I remember one of the guys joking, well, he didn't kill any of us, so I guess it's fine. We laughed at the time, but I think we were all a little uneasy. The rest of the weekend went fine. We finished the trip and went home. I forgot about it after a while. The years passed, life moved on. New jobs, new relationships. I didn't really keep up with that group much after that. People got busy. We all drifted. And then that night, sitting on my brother's couch, staring at the news, I saw that face again. The man they arrested had been using multiple names. The news didn't give his full history, but they said investigators believed he had been moving from park to park across Ontario and Quebec for years, possibly even into the States. He camped off-grid, avoided cities, and picked victims carefully. Some were other campers. Some were lone hikers. Most of them had vanished without a trace. They gave a timeline. The earliest confirmed incident was about 8 months before that camping trip of ours. I sat there frozen. I could hear my brother making noise in the kitchen, but it felt far away. My brain was spinning. I grabbed my phone and started searching for everything I could find. Articles, forum threads, old news clips, anything. I kept looking at the timeline. There were big gaps. The police were still trying to piece it all together. But something stood out to me. A missing hiker case from a park only 2 hours east of where we had been, dated just 3 weeks before our trip, and another from a park north of us just 1 month later. There was no direct proof, no names I recognized, but something in me clicked. That night in the woods, we had been sitting next to someone who might have already committed a violent crime. Or maybe he hadn't yet and we were just spared. I thought back to that night, how we let him join us, how we slept in our tents while he sat awake watching the fire, how none of us questioned it. We just went to sleep, unzipped nylon separating us from a man we didn't know. The next few weeks after that news story were strange. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started reading more, about the missing, about other campers who had encounters they couldn't explain. Similar patterns. Same sort of man. There's something terrifying about the idea that someone can move through life unnoticed. That someone could walk into your circle, eat nothing, drink nothing, speak barely a word, and then disappear before dawn. I haven't camped since. I still go on hikes sometimes, but I stick to short ones, popular ones, places where you're never really alone. I tell myself I'm just being cautious, but I know it's fear. I printed out a screenshot of the news report with his face. I keep it in a drawer. Sometimes I take it out and just look at it. Not because I want to scare myself, but because I want to remember how close we came to something that could have gone a very different way. Sometimes people ask me why I don't camp anymore. I tell them it's because I've gotten soft, that I'm too busy. But the truth is, once you've seen that face again, the one that watched you sleep, you don't go back out into the dark. Not like before. Not ever again. I don't usually go on long hikes with big groups, but that trip was different. There were 5 of us, me, Darren, Ethan, Mark, and Tom. We'd all gone to college together, but over the years, we drifted. Life took over, I guess. Jobs, relationships, routines. But that fall, we somehow all had the same week free, and we decided to do something together again. A deep woods hike. Something off the grid, nothing fancy. No service, no hotels, just the trail and whatever we could carry. We picked a trail deep in the Appalachians, not one of those tourist-heavy routes. This one was remote, barely maintained. We'd read about it in an old forum post and found some basic coordinates. It looped through dense forest, mostly uphill for the first couple of days, and then dropped back down toward a few streams and old, long-abandoned mining areas. The plan was to hike in for 4 days, camp where we could, then loop back. The first 2 days were good. Hard but good. Cold nights, warm fires, tired legs, but nothing we couldn't handle. The terrain was rough in places, wet leaves, uneven rocks, a few moments where one of us would slip or catch a boot on a route. But no real injuries. The forest was deep, the kind where the canopy hangs so thick you forget the sun is even up. Felt like stepping back in time. The quiet kind of got to me sometimes. No cars, no distant hums, not even birds once you got far enough in. Just the wind and our boots on the trail and our breathing. By the 3rd night, we were deeper in than we'd planned. The trail markers had started getting harder to find. At some point, we must have followed a false trail or maybe an animal path, but we didn't realize it right away. We thought we were still on track until it started getting dark and we still hadn't found the stream we were supposed to reach. Tom was the first to bring it up. Said something like the terrain didn't match what we'd mapped. Ethan and Mark pulled out their phones, but we'd lost signal sometime that morning. Darren tried to use his compass, but it didn't help much without a reliable map. We weren't in a panic, not yet, but there was this quiet tension settling over all of us. No one wanted to admit we were off track. We just started scanning the woods for any sign of a clearing, any flat ground where we could set up camp. That's when we saw the cabin. It was off the main trail, if you could even call the worn path. We were on a trail by then, and slightly up a slope, tucked between thick trunks of pine and oak. At first, it didn't even look like a building, just a shadowed shape kind of buried in the trees. But as we got closer, we saw the straight lines. Wood, a roof, a chimney made of old stone. It was small, just one room as far as we could tell, maybe 16 by 20 feet. The wood siding was faded gray and warped in places. Moss was creeping up the bottom walls. One shutter was hanging loose, swinging a little in the breeze. But the door was intact, closed, but not locked. No signs of recent activity. No tire marks, no tools, no stacked firewood. It looked like no one had been there in years. Decades, maybe. We stood around it for a bit, deciding. It didn't feel right using someone else's space like that. But it was already almost dark, and the woods were getting colder. The idea of a roof over our heads, of solid walls, sounded like luxury. In the end, we told ourselves we'd just sleep there for the night. Be gone by sunrise. Leave it cleaner than we found it. Inside, it was surprisingly dry. Dusty, sure. Musty. But no animals, no sign of nests or droppings. Just a bare wooden floor, a fireplace built into one wall, and a few old chairs and crates scattered around. A shelf with broken dishes. A couple of rusted tools. And the paintings, that's what caught our attention right away. The walls were lined with them, maybe 8 or 9 in total, hung at uneven heights. They weren't professional, more like homemade portraits. Oil paint, maybe acrylics, old, cracked in some places. Each painting showed a person, man, woman, child, different ages. No names, just faces, shoulders, torsos, and none of them smiling. They had this look to them, like the artist was trying to copy real life but didn't quite get the proportions right. Some of the eyes were too big. One man's face was stretched too long. A woman's hands were folded but out of place, like her wrists bent wrong. The colors were off too. Pale skin tones, almost sickly. Dark, shadowy backgrounds. They looked like family portraits, the kind you'd see in old country homes, but something was just off. We joked about them at first, pointed out the weird details, tried to guess who was supposed to be who. Darren said one looked like Mark if he got punched in the face. Ethan said one of the kids looked like he had shark eyes. We laughed, but it didn't last long. Something about the cabin made it hard to joke. The air felt stale, heavy, the kind of air that hadn't moved in a long time. Still, we laid out our sleeping bags. No one wanted to sleep near the fireplace, so we ended up spaced out in a rough circle. I remember I kept looking at the paintings. I tried to sleep on my side, facing the door, but I couldn't help glancing at the wall behind me. It felt like the eyes in the portraits followed you. I knew they couldn't, of course, just brushstrokes on canvas. But every time I blinked, it felt like something had shifted, like a head had tilted slightly, a mouth had opened just a little more. I must have fallen asleep sometime after midnight. I remember waking up once in the dark and hearing the wind outside. The wood creaked. The floor shifted with someone's breathing, but no one spoke. Eventually, I passed out again. When I woke up, it was morning. The light was coming in bright and soft, slanting across the room through what I assumed were gaps in the wood siding. I sat up slowly. My back ached from the floor. I rubbed my eyes, then looked around, and froze. The walls were covered in windows. I didn't understand at first. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, the paintings were gone. All of them. In their place were windows, real windows. Glass panes set into the walls, like they'd always been there. They were clean, too. Clear. You could see straight through them out into the woods. Trees. The slope. The path we'd come up. The sky. I stood up. The others were still asleep. I walked slowly to one of the windows, pressing my hand against the cold glass. I looked closer. No signs that anything had been taken off the wall.
No hooks.
No scratches where nails used to be. Just window frames, smooth and solid, as if they'd always been part of the cabin. I turned and looked around the room again, slowly this time. Every wall had at least one window now. Where the stretched man's portrait had been, I could see the forest. Where the woman with the twisted hands had hung, there was a view of the slope. It was all visible now in bright morning light. I don't know how long I stood there. My stomach felt like it had dropped. My hands were cold. I didn't know what to say or what to think. Eventually, Tom stirred, then Darren. One by one, the others woke up. I didn't speak. I didn't want to be the first one to say it. I just stood there, staring out, until someone finally noticed. They all reacted the same way I had. First confusion, then silence. We walked the whole cabin, inside and out, looked for signs, checked our packs. No one heard anything in the night. No one woke up. No one saw anyone come or go. But the windows were there, solid, real. No way we could have missed them the night before. No way we could have imagined those paintings. We remembered them, every weird detail, every warped face. We packed up quickly. No one said much. We didn't even eat, just shouldered our gear and left. Took a rough bearing and headed back in the direction we thought we'd come from. We didn't even try to loop back to finish the trail, just wanted out. We hiked for almost 10 hours that day. Eventually, we hit a dirt service road and followed it out until we reached a ranger station. They asked where we'd been and we tried to explain, but we didn't mention the cabin. Not really, just said we got turned around, found shelter, hiked out. That was 5 years ago. None of us really talk about it anymore. I don't hike in that area now. I still wonder what we saw, how that cabin changed, if it really did, or if something else happened, something simpler, something worse. The only thing I'm sure of is that those weren't paintings. We thought they were, but they weren't. They were windows, and we were being watched. I didn't even know what the word meant until a friend texted it to me after I told them I was going camping alone for a weekend. "You're gonna get spooked," she wrote with a skull emoji. I laughed and ignored it, thinking it was just a weird internet word. But after what happened out there, I think I understand what it really means now. It's not the same as being scared. Being spooked is when something sticks to your bones, when it feels like the world has tilted a little and nothing is as safe or ordinary as it used to be. And the worst part is it didn't come from ghosts or monsters. It came from something real, something human. I'd been stressed for weeks before I took that trip. My job had been killing me. Working late, constant messages, deadlines that kept getting moved up. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I needed space. I needed quiet. I wanted trees and wind, and to wake up with the sun instead of my phone alarm. So I packed up my gear, filled a cooler with enough food for 3 days, grabbed my old hiking pack, and drove upstate to a campground I'd only used once before. It was far off the main highway, about an hour from any gas station, down a gravel forest road that twisted like a broken rib through the woods. No service, no electricity, just primitive campsites, spaced far apart, with fire rings and pit toilets. I chose site number 12 because it was closest to the lake. I figured I'd do some reading, maybe fish if I felt like it, and mostly just sit in the quiet. The first night was peaceful. I got there in the late afternoon, set up my tent, collected some firewood, and cooked sausages over the fire. I watched the sun go down behind the trees, turning the lake surface orange, and then pink. Everything felt right. It was one of those rare moments where your brain stops buzzing and you just exist. I didn't even realize how much I needed that until I had it. I went to bed early, right after the fire burned down. It was chilly but not cold, just enough for the sleeping bag to feel comforting. I left the tent flap open so I could see the stars. I fell asleep to the sound of the wind in the trees and the occasional splash of fish in the water. That night was uneventful. The second day started off the same. I made instant coffee on my camp stove and ate granola with powdered milk. I hiked a little ways around the lake, nothing too far. I saw deer tracks, found a snake sunning itself on a rock, and even came across an old tree stand in a pine grove that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I went back to camp around noon and took a nap in the shade. I didn't notice anything off until the afternoon. When I woke up, the sun was lower and the shadows had started stretching across the ground. I walked down to the water to splash my face, and that's when I saw it. A boot print. It was in the mud right by the water's edge, near where I'd stood the day before, but it wasn't mine. Mine had a distinct waffle tread cheap hiking boots. This one was a deep, narrow heel with a circular pattern around the toe, like military or tactical style boots. And it was fresh. The edges were crisp. The water hadn't filled it in yet. I looked around instinctively, but I didn't see or hear anything. It was still and quiet just like before. But now I had this tightness in my chest I couldn't shake. I told myself it could have been left earlier that morning by another hiker. The lake trail wasn't technically private, but I hadn't seen anyone. No other campsites were taken when I arrived. No cars at the lot. And it wasn't like this place was popular. I walked the perimeter of my site slowly, checked for other prints. Nothing stood out. I didn't hear any twigs snapping, no voices in the distance. Still, I couldn't relax after that. I kept glancing over my shoulder, listening harder to every sound. That night, I kept the fire going later than usual. I didn't want to be alone in the dark with my thoughts. I kept trying to read, but I wasn't absorbing anything. My ears were tuned in too tightly to the forest sounds. At one point, I thought I heard something out in the brush to the north. Maybe a rustle or a soft thud. But when I stood up and walked out with my flashlight, I didn't see anything. Just dry leaves, tree trunks, and the beam of my light cutting through empty space. I didn't sleep well that night. I woke up multiple times. At first it was normal stuff, a wind gust, a creak of the trees. But around 2 a.m., I woke up with a jolt. No clear reason why. My heart was pounding. I lay still, barely breathing, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't loud. Just slow, deliberate crunches of leaves, maybe 10 yards from my tent. Maybe less. Then they stopped. I sat up and strained to listen. For almost a minute, there was nothing. Then I heard a low creak, like a branch bending. Then quiet again. I stayed like that for what felt like forever. I had bear spray by my side and a hatchet under the sleeping pad, but I didn't unzip the tent. I was too frozen. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep or passed out from exhaustion. In the morning, I checked around the site. No prints, no signs of animals. The fire pit was undisturbed. My cooler was untouched. Nothing stolen. But I was still uneasy. Something wasn't right. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd read too many stories online. Could have been a deer. Could have been anything. So I forced myself to go about the day. I cooked breakfast. Took my mug down to the lake to drink by the water. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Later that afternoon, I heard a vehicle on the access road. Not uncommon, it was the only way in or out. But when I walked up toward the turnoff to get a better look, there was nothing. No car. No sound of an engine pulling away. Just silence, like I imagined it. But then I saw something else. On the trail back to my site, I noticed a zip tie on a branch at shoulder height. Just a single black zip tie wrapped around a dead limb, pointing toward my campsite. It hadn't been there the day before. I checked the other direction and found another one, about 30 feet further, on a pine sapling. Another marker. People don't just randomly put zip ties in the woods. My hands started shaking. My stomach dropped. That's when I decided to pack up early. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. I threw everything into my trunk. I didn't fold anything, just stuffed the tent, sleeping bag, and food bins inside. I didn't even bother with the last night's firewood. As I backed out of the site, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. Trees, shadows, nothing. But about 10 minutes down the gravel road, I saw something that made my skin go cold. It was a small camo tarp, bundled with rope, half hidden behind a tree just off the road. I only caught it because of the way the light hit the green fabric. It looked like it had been tucked away quickly. I slowed down but didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I knew I had to get out of there. When I got back to the main road and finally had cell signal, I called the ranger station and reported what I saw. I told them about the boot print, the zip ties, and the tarp. They said they'd send someone to check it out and thanked me for letting them know. I didn't hear anything back. I didn't ask for a follow-up. A few days later, still feeling shaken, I searched online to see if anything had happened in that area. I didn't find any recent crimes. No missing persons. But there were old reports, backlogged stories about people going missing from parks, cases that stayed unsolved. Some campers had disappeared years ago from forests not far from there. Lone travelers, people like me. I kept thinking about how close I might have come to something terrible. How easy it would have been. No one around for miles. No service. Just one person out there marking trees. Waiting. I didn't go camping again for a long time after that. When I did, it was always in public campgrounds with neighbors, lights, rangers nearby. I never hiked solo again. And every once in a while, when I'm outside and hear a twig snap or a rustle in the dark, I remember those footsteps. I remember that print by the lake. I remember being frozen in my tent while someone, or something, waited just out of sight. I didn't see a face. I didn't hear a voice. But I've never felt watched like that before. That's what it means to be spooked. Not haunted, just hunted. And knowing that if I hadn't left when I did, I might not be writing this right now.